My name is Kelly Sharpe. I'm one of the owners of GK Technology. We are a software and uh, mapping company based out of Halstad, Minnesota. I just pop open a website here just so you guys see. You guys have seen the links and stuff on it. You guys maybe have been using some of the ADMS software with some of the other things that you've done. But we're based out of Halstad, Minnesota. We've been writing software since 2004. We incorporated in 2006. We do and supply mapping services also, so you can see a little bit about our services here. We do topography mapping, tile planning, along with our software. We also write a product called SD Drain, which is sold through Russ Sales for doing ditching and tiling installs, and then get into truck crop yield monitoring and stuff like that. So just a little bit of background about our company. I won't drag you through all this stuff, just making you aware of some stuff there. One of the things that we get asked all too often is this exact question here. Looking into precision ag and should we do zones or should we do grids? And with that being said, I'll just take you through a little presentation here. Grids get into the component of you go out at each one of those numbers and you'll pull a series of soil samples. So if you were to go to grid point number 1, you'd pull in that grid point number 1 and go around and pull anywhere from 10 to 20, typically around 14 or 15 soil cores in this area that is grid number 1. Usually people go out to the sample point and just kind of do a loop, about a 40, 50 foot loop around number 1, and then go to number 2, go to number 3, and so on and so on. And each one gets to go in and has its own sample bag going to whatever sample lab you're working with. In the concept of management zones, we're going out there and using something to derive the zones, whether it be imagery, yield, some other things like that. But we end up with these management zones, and we go in there and we'll go into the red zone and pull cores for the red zones and send those into the lab, pulls cores for the orange zones and send those in as a sample, in the yellows and the light greens and the dark greens, and so on. So basically 2 basic methods. So something I want to make you aware of here for this talk, primarily I'm going to be focusing on kind of my first two steps of what I call my variable rate cycle. Basically, we start and kind of end with data. With that being said, that data then gets turned into the data would also be analysis and some other things along those lines. So we're kind of picking up on the backside of the data. I'm going to be using that to derive either our zones or our grids. But then you got your fertility needs, you're going out soil sampling, your prescription writing, whatever prescription methods you're believing and or needing to do, and then the application, taking it back out to the field. So we're going to focus on zones versus grids. A couple of things that are really important before you go diving into using either zones or grids. Really what you want to do is do a little bit of CSI work. Look back on your field, see what your historical items are out in the field, looking at previous soil samples, things like that. There's a lot to be said about looking at past soil samples, also looking at past cropping histories, several different things that are going to come into play here. When you're doing that history work, you really want to pay attention to, have you had manure history and things like that in the past? Manure history, I tell people that's not just something that's going to be in the last 5 or 10 years. This could go back 30, 40, even 50 years. That old farmyard that went and has been gone for years and years and years. Getting one core out of where the old manure pile used to be could be catastrophic in getting a false soil sample in a conventional soil test or in anything, whatever it might be, whether it be a grid test or whether it be a zone test, or it really doesn't matter on any of those. That can be really devastating. The worst thing you can have happen when you pull a soil test is that you get a false high, or that you get an actual high in with your 15 probes that you put in the bucket for, say, your dark green management zone. You hit that one core that all the rest of them are saying your nitrogen is 20 pounds, 25 pounds, 15 pounds, 30 pounds, and then you get that one core in there that's 800 pounds from an old manure pile. That one core out of 15 can really skew the results in a quick hurry, and again, those are the things you really want to watch out for. So other items here are looking at your soil test values and your histories. So if you have historical conventional soil tests, historical zone soil tests, we expect to see things coming in fairly steady, fairly uniform, fairly average, if you will. I don't expect my phosphate numbers to jump around an awful lot. Nitrogen and sulfur could jump around because they're mobile nutrients. On the P and K side, your P and K numbers shouldn't wander around and go from 300 to 500. If you're seeing that, that might be a thing that might start steering you towards some different settings and stuff like that. So, some things for you to be remembering is that mobile nutrient versus immobile nutrient. So the mobile nutrients are going to be much more fitting to doing management zones. If that's the number one things that you're chasing after, is nitrogen and sulfur, management zones are a clear answer for you. That's where you want to be at. If you historically have had low testing P and K, zones are generally going to be pretty good fits for you. If you're going out there and you've got stuff that has manure history, has pH, perhaps needs some liming out there, also maybe in looking at your soil test has had really erratic P and K numbers on it, these are going to be really good places to go out and consider going out and grid sampling your fields. So two very distinct differences. Like I say, these are very black and white answers for me. If you're doing the mobiles, your zones. If you're doing P and K for erratic history and you got pH issues, you got manure histories, those are going to be things that you're going to want to definitely go after grids. Things down at the bottom here are going to be things that might go either way. Cut-up cropping histories, your soil P and K has been testing very high, uniformly high all the time. If you're chasing soil zinc issues, drainage changes, zones or grids might be the right answer. If your cut-up cropping history means that you got a quarter that's been 280s in the past, maybe management zones are the right answer, but you make a set of zones for this 80 versus that 80. And again, then when it comes time for application, you'll merge them together for your application portions of what you do. So just some things to think about when it comes to zones and grids. So another thing that we don't talk about a lot, and I will reiterate, and I got to go back, that is for variable rate fertilizer. But as you go along, and you get into variable rate herbicide or perhaps variable rate seeding, which most of you guys are probably thinking more along the lines of variable rate seeding is going to be pretty commonplace. But I make a point for you that when you get into those things, zones are probably going to be the answer that most of you guys would be thinking about, or be it yield data, be it satellite imagery, aerial imagery type of things. Again, moving more towards the zone side of things. Is probably going to be your better answer. But here, if you're going after the herbicide side, you might be looking at something where you got aerial imagery that shows you patches of weeds that are going to be there year after year after year, wild oats and thistles, are maybe really good examples. Leafy spurge would be another good example of stuff that kind of gets established in an area and generally doesn't move all that much. Now, if you're chasing after something like kochia or some of the other weeds that maybe, like I said, the tumbleweed theory there is a tough one, and neither zones or grids are going to fit well for either one of those. But zones might work well there. Your soil types that you might get from Veris or from the Surgo soils maps could potentially be helpful if you're using herbicides that would be sensitive to things along the lines of some of the herbicides that would be sensitive to pH, would be sensitive to soil type issues. Seed is going to be, the zones are going to be a good answer for all the crops. Management zones are going to work very, very well for seed. Grids are not going to be your answer on the seed side, basically ever. Zones might be a good choice for iron chlorosis, the EDDHA issues, the iron chlorosis issues. Grids are going to be really good if you have pH sensitive chemicals. Things where you're maybe getting longer, shorter carryovers, things to think about there. Grids might be a great option. Soybean IDC issues, even for soybean seeding for IDC issues, grids might be the right answer. But I will make a point for you. If you do grid sampling for that side of it, you're probably going to get away from the 2.5 acre grids and probably go down to 1 acre grids. And I know everybody's excited to go and do and pay for 1 acre grid sampling. It's very expensive, but it's a piece of information that you just can't get any other way. If you really want to start tracking your soil pHs, your calciums, your some of the salt issues and things that cause the IDC issues. So those are some of the base premises for trying to decide if you're going to do zones or grids, and ways to use them also. So the next part of what I'm going to discuss here is going to be going through looking at using management zones. Talking with Rob, I've found that you guys have already done some stuff with yield and some stuff with imagery and things like that. So I don't want to get bogged down in the information behind here, but I do want to make some general comments here for you. Looking at some comments about imagery. These are just very general comments that I've got. I always hear people say that that's either a good image or a bad image, and I'm just as guilty. I say the same thing. But what I really want to make a point of is that depending on what you're using it for, a image or a piece of yield data or anything like that might be, it's better described as useful or not useful. A great example would be 2019 yield data. A lot of people are going, oh, well, 2019 yield data really isn't, it's bad data. It was harvested when it was cold out. It was, I didn't get it off in a good timely fashion, whatever it might be. I didn't get whole fields planted, and say that it's a bad piece of input for management zones. On the backside of that, it would tell you that might be one of the greatest pieces of information for you if you had part of it that was basically fallow and the other part of it that was farmed. That might be a 1 year, maybe even a 2 year piece of information for you to make a choice or a change in the way that maybe I apply my NP and K on that other part of the field that was fallow versus the part that got farmed. But that may not be a long-term piece of data, but just making a point, good and bad. So as you go through these, so that would have been the NAPE from 2010. So here's the April 20th image from that same year. You can kind of see patterns and trends already starting to kind of develop to some extent. But just making a point here that as you get into more rolling hills type of environments, you may see and light soil, heavy soil type environments, wet drowned out and higher, drier type soil types. You're going to see parts of the field that maybe emerge and come up and look good early on in the season, move throughout the season, and maybe that area burns up and becomes some very low production areas at the end of the season, or that area drowns out and becomes damage at the end of the season. So you really got to be careful what images and stuff you're choosing for these next components as we're building management zones. So just making that point from the June 23rd to the July 9th, you really start to see there's a hill over on this side of the field here that's starting to really kind of show up. By July 25th, it's burning up some more, and by August, you see these areas that, these red areas that my mouse is over here are areas that are going to be, this is going to be a hill, this is going to be some salinity issues and whatnot down in here, but this is going to be a hill right here. So just pointing out some things for you here. So next item, where I'm going with this portion of the talk is I want to talk about making management zones and the option of using bare soils or vegetation, yield data. There's lots of different options out there. This is just a real simple explanation of looking at bare soils versus vegetation to build my management zones, and we'll come back and talk more about this. I just want to run you through kind of an example of doing a full write-up on bare soils, and then just kind of, you'll see the outputs of what these are about. So what I want to point out is this image on the left is a 2003 bare soils of this field, of FSA map, if you will. This would be 1 meter or 2 meter aerial imagery stuff flown by the FSA through their National Ag Imagery Program. Here on the right, you see a bit more of a vegetation. You can see the greenness of where crop is growing and less green where crop isn't growing as well. But just making a point, there are kind of two different concepts to be chasing after here. So, and here's the extracted red band of visible light on these two pieces of data. So again, the image itself, and then this is the red band of visible light showing through right here. So, so with the concept of bare soils are going to be April through May, generally in our region, September through October, again, generally in our region. This year, maybe not such a great example with the way that our crops got pushed back. The September, October may not be good examples for 2019, but most years our beans and stuff are being harvested by September. Our crops have dried down and are getting harvested in September and October. So generally speaking, we're going to use near infrared light for the extraction on this one, or we'll use the red band visible light, not combining any bands for NDVI or anything like that. They're going to be intended to show you soil color, soil types, organic matter, perhaps a wetness of the soil, even farming practices. Keep in mind, this is not intended to show you yield and true biomass type indicators. Again, just kind of a different way of looking at things. In this example, here's 10 images that went into the finished product. I didn't even worry about putting years or anything like that. Just making a point to you, you'll notice that these images move around a lot more due to soil moisture items, things like that. The bare soil stuff can be really complicated to work with because there's a lot of variabilities that come into play. Other item of note that people get into with bare soils is that this area, this particular field is out in Wells County, North Dakota, central part of North Dakota, just north of Steele, North Dakota, if anyone knows where that's at. But the point to be made here is that they don't do a lot of tillage out in that area. It's a lot of no-till out there. And people say, well, you can't do bare soils on a no-till. And I would take up the argument and say, yes, we can. We can do bare soils type mapping on the stubble, if you will, of the crop and whatnot. So just making a point, though, you see how much these images are moving around. You watch this area in through here, and now you don't see it coming through, and then it looks good here, it's not here. It just, it moves around an awful lot. Other item of note is we take those images, and something that we have integrated into our software is ability to do what we call a correlation matrix. So you can turn all the images that you're trying to put together, and you can go across the table and see how similar data is. And generally speaking, anything less than a 0.3 is considered not meaningful. Anything from a 0.3 to a 0.5 is considered a weak correlation. From a 0.5 to a 0.7 is considered a moderate correlation, and anything greater than a 0.7 would be considered a strong correlation. What you see here is just a table of all the images that I threw at, well, actually not all the images. I threw about 30 images at this in the raw form, and I boiled it down to less than that. But the point to be made here is down at the bottom here, I put averages of what all the images summed up to. The averages were for each one of those image combinations. So again, the concept here is to use some math to try to boil off or get rid of some of the weaker images that don't maybe show things. So reminder here, one of the things that I promote very strongly when you're building management zones is the concept of merging data. The concept of, and I don't care if you're using satellite imagery, I don't care if you're using aerial UAV data, I don't care if you're using yield data. Any of these components are going to they're going to be influenced very strongly by the weather pattern of that year, perhaps a variety that you put out in that field. If there was a disease that came through, if there was some smut, or if there was a rust, or insects came through, aphids came through and chewed your beans up later in the year, all those types of things. Other items, if you lost the field due to weed control issues, fertility issues, where maybe you had some starter pop-up issues or something that didn't get put down right, mechanical problems where maybe it was tillage, maybe you had some rows that put seed in too deep, all kinds of different things like that can really sway the effect of what 1 year of data might have in it that you don't think about. Spray drift issues, all kinds of things. So by merging together multiple years of data, we're going to try to overcome that idea that crop had a really good growing season that year, and then the next year we didn't have as good of a growing season. It was wetter, it was drier, it was hotter, it was cooler, all those components. By merging data together, we get stronger management zones. I call this image stratification. Basically, when the low production areas are low time after time after time, they're going to be the lowest in the overall merge management zones. When I get a part of a field that's really strong 1 year and weak another year, and strong another year and strong another year, it doesn't end up being the best area of the field. It ends up lowering that into a different kind of into its own management zone. And the area that's strong, 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 and strong is going to be the best management zone when it's all said and done. So that is the base concept of merging the data. So with that being said, what you're seeing here is the merge of all of my bare soils data. I use a correlation matrix on it. In this example, in this finished product here, there's actually 18 images merged together to make that set of management zones on that field. So as I scroll down here, I'm going to just run through, I'm not going to do that whole write-up on everything here. I am going to just touch on some stuff here. So vegetative images are generally going to be in June to August in our region. Generally speaking, I'm going to use the NDVI method. Keep in mind there's an NDVI red and an NDVI green option that's out there. I'm showing the NDVI red in this example. I am not promoting one over the other here. I'm just pointing out that NDVI red uses the NIR minus red divided by NIR plus red. NDVI green would take the NIR minus green divided by NIR plus green. I will leave it up to you guys to figure out when and where to use each one of those. These are going to be intended to show biomass or vegetation. Canopy or ground cover represent potential yield. This thing about the biomass component of it, this has been something of a bit of a contentious item for me. Knowing what I know about imagery, one of the things that happens all too frequently is we get later into the season and your wheat field, your corn field, your soybeans start to dry down, but there's still plenty of crops standing out there, but yet we say that they're biomass driven. Well, NDVI really measures chlorophyll at the end of the day is what it measures. So that biomass term is a bit of a is a bit more of it's a little bit of a misnomer, if you will, of what's actually happening out there, because there's still lots of biomass out there when that wheat crop has gone golden brown, and there's still standing crop out there, but there's not a lot of chlorophyll left in the plant. So anyways, this not intended to show the soil type or soil colors in that scenario. So here's just a visual of the merged. Here's 15 images of over roughly 15 years actually of images merged together for how this field would produce or look with the NDVI images merged together. I also did a assessment here using the high-resolution FSA NAPE imagery, and I merged together 4 years of FSA NAPE imagery to produce this map. Again, kind of just using some generalities of that. And then the last one here is, this is merging together actually 3 years of yield data, what you see on, or 4 years of yield data here on the right, sorry. Some things that I want to make a point of merging with yield data, even with the imagery components too, if you're going to be going after the vegetation. Merging wheat with wheat is always going to be the best, or corn with corn, or similar crops with similar crops, or same crop with same crop. But similar crops, if you're putting corn and wheat together, if they have similar production patterns, similar yield patterns, similar vegetative looks across the field, I would say you're going to be just fine putting those together. Some crops might be a standalone. Case in point for Red River Valley stuff here. If you have soybean IDC issues, soybeans might be just a standalone crop. I would tell you that I have no problem putting wheat, corn, sugar beets, edible beans together. Sunflowers generally go together pretty well. Canola can be a little bit of a finicky item. Generally it stands pretty well, but it might be a bit more depending on your issues of what you got. Case in point though, if you do have things like this where soybeans, if you do have IDC, we get some of our worst soybean yields in some of the best corn and wheat production and sugar beet production areas, just due to the fact that they're very high calcium issues and are causing soybean IDC issues and things like that. So just things to be aware of when you're trying to merge together stuff. And that was looking at yield data there. Last item here that I got for building management zones and with the kind of merging data together here, especially with yield. Yield can be your best data. It can be your worst data. And what happens there is like 2019, if you only got partial parts of the field harvested, it's probably not going to be the best data to put together for management zones. In this case, they had some combines running around out there that were not calibrated together with each other, and you see the streakiness, the craziness of what's going on with this yield data. They've got 20, 30, 40 bushel, actually there's spots in here that they got almost 30 bushel swings in wheat yield data. Not good. So this that calibration component can be a big thing. Remember also, what are you using this data for? You might run into data that looks like this, where you got corn varieties on split planters, so they got a 24 row and they harvested 12 rows of this variety and 12 rows of this variety. You can get maps that will come back looking like this. It might be some of the best yield data in the world, but it might make me think twice about using it for management zones. So keep in mind, data might be good for one thing, but not good for another. So just some things to be aware of. Last item, a note here, again, mentioned the thing about the variety. Other things about like planting date. If you plant a part of a field one day and you get rained out for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you get rained out for a month, and you come back and finish planting the other part of the field. Those non-uniformities of that field has nothing to do with the production characteristics of the field. It just comes down to when you planted it or when you harvested it, and things like that. So I'm getting variety splits and stuff out there. So finishing up the zone component of this, you can kind of take a look at this, comparing your yield data to your vegetative and your bare soils and stuff like that. But what you're seeing down here is on the left, that bare soils with 18 images going into it, the LS for Landsat vegetation map coming down there with 15 images going into it, the FSA NAPE imagery, the 1 and 2 meter aerial photography, at 4 images going into that, and the yield data with 4 pieces of yield going in there. Mind you, the one that I would say is, if you wanted to go purely after production basis, obviously yield is the one that I would tell you is the one that we would say, yep, that's the way that field produces. But one of the things that I would want to point out to you here is just visually looking at them, you can see the trends that the bare soil doesn't really necessarily represent that yield just by visually the vegetation and the yield, the NAPE. I did do a little bit of an analysis here with the correlation matrix. So again, taking the 4-year yield and then what you see down here, this last number at the bottom, the merged normalized, basically I normalized all these maps coming in, and this is the statistical analysis between those two. And what you want to see here is that we basically got a 90% correlation between the 4-year yield merged and the merged normalized. Keep in mind that merged normalized has that 18 images of bare soil going into it. So it was basically these 1, 2, 3, 4 images going in there to make that normalized map there. So each one is going in as its own map. But just making the point here, if I was going to do this, I would probably let the bare soils disappear. And I mean, you look at the similarities between even the NAPE, the vegetation image, the 4 years of yield data. I mean, they all have some pretty darn good correlations. The only one that doesn't really go well here is the bare soils. So one more layer that you will run into from time to time, and I am all for this data. It's not something that I get a lot of, but it is stuff that I run into in the countryside. And if you guys are using it, looking at using it, I strongly encourage you to be trying it out. But Veris or EM38 data or soil conductivity data. This is a bit of can be a standalone layer. The reason being that soil conductivity, you may end up with a very low soil EC, a very low conductivity, and it's a low production part of the field. You may end up with another part of the field that has a very high soil conductivity, and it also could be a low production part of the field. So when you start trying to merge this together with a lot of these other layers, it just doesn't match up, and it may not make a lot of sense. If you are in areas where you have sands and salinity and things like that, soil EC data is a awesome layer to be using. So the intention of it is to give you soil texture, soil salts, to isolate water table, show you water table heights and depths and water readings and things like that. So keep in mind, it might be a layer that if you do run into it, it may or may not merge together well with your data. So real similar to the soybean component of things. It just might have some different things going on. It might be just a standalone layer, and let it be what it is. So again, reminder, primarily zones are going to be for nitrogen and sulfur. Consistent P and K zones can be derived from these items, and at that point, you're up to taking your zones through to your fertility component where you take it out, soil sampling. I just threw this in here. I'm not going to go deep into the soil sampling component of this, but what I did want to point out to you is that, sorry about that, got a little bit of a I think this slide's on a timer, but point to be made here is this field that I had out in Wells County, This orange zone over here, the ones in the middle of the field, are going to be more hilltop type events. They're going to be lighter soils. When you pull the probe out of the ground, they're going to be a bit more gravelly, a little more fall apart type soils. You got a little more sand and loam in them. The stuff down along these edges, this black that you see down here, you're in pothole prairie area. This is standing water. This is standing water up here also. So this orange zone and red zone down along the bottom here, these are going to be water holding areas. These are going to be soil salinity issues, things like that. And these two soil types are nothing similar to each other in any way, shape, or form. And in management zones, we need to differentiate those two and say, this orange is different than this orange. So what we like to do is take those areas and make them into like a blue zone, or put them into a different management zone type, and say, we're going to pull this as its own zone up here, and then pull these down here as their own zones down here. So last item of note here, I just wanted to point out to you, as you get your data back from the sampling lab here, I've just got a spreadsheet of some stuff that I've done here. But over to the right here, pH, organic matter, your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, zinc, and salts here. These are the things that are going to come back in that soil test. You'll notice that I'm a big believer in yield goals, and that if areas produce better, we should probably give them a little more fertilizer. Areas produce poorer, we probably should give them a little less fertilizer. The concept that I was going after here is taking that dark green zone and saying, no, this is a field a little bit more in the Red River Valley. It's down by Hillsborough, Clifford, Galesburg area. And it's got some soil salinity up on this north side here, and it's pretty good soils down through this area here on the southwest end of the field. Point to be made on it is that, hey, we can pull 200 bushel out of these areas, no problem. You'll notice we didn't test the light green, where again we skipped it for the looking for variability component of it, and we're going to let the software interpolate from here down to the yellow. So we're going to say we had no test in there. We're going to shoot for 150 bushel in the yellow, kind of looking for field average, or maybe a little below field average here. So the yellow, we went down to there, and here's our seeding rates, but here's our recommendation for fertilizer. The orange zone here going down to 110 bushel, and then the salinity areas here. We got in these salinity areas with 4 or 5 years of yield data. I've got parts of these red areas that have never done better than 20 bushel corn. So, but on average, we're going to say that we're going to shoot for 50 bushel corn. And here's kind of the seeding rates. Here's the breakdown of what we would potentially be doing on this field. So just kind of bringing you back to the application component of it. So at the end of it, here's our yield goal map. Here's our nitrogen, our phosphorus, our potassium soil tests. And on the right-hand side here, you're going to see the application maps going from 0 pounds of fertilizer in those real salinity spots and going up to 248 pounds of urea going down in these better spots out here from 0 to 181 pounds of 1152 going down in this area, and then the potash map that didn't get applied because it really only needed it needed a 1,600 pounds total product out there, and just got skipped. It wasn't needing that much product, and kind of a grower choice there. So I'm going to finish off here by talking about grids. Here. So taking our management zones and our grids, kind of reminder of what we were talking about. This is going to be more manure, pH liming, phosphorus, P&K, erratics. So still on that same field that we were just looking at down by Clifford, Galesburg, Hillsborough area. Again, the reason that we're really chasing after it on this one is we have seen some erratic phosphorus and potassium stuff out there. So we wanted to see. One of the things that you got to remember with the way that I recommend using grid samples is we do require some yield or yield goals to drive my program, or what I would recommend for grid sampling programs. In this example, they did pull 2-foot cores. Normally, they only pull 6-inch soil samples, so it's just the top 6 inches. So when you think about pulling all those samples, pulling 56 samples on this field, you don't have to pull the 2-foot or the 4-foot samples on it in most cases. So. Some things to take note of here. I'm going to just run through a little bit on the potassium portion of it. Mind you, you're going to get a layer like this for every one of the soil test values, but at each grid point, so you're going to see the value here. We got 144 parts per million of potassium there, 176 parts, and so on and so on. You can see the values at each test right here. I used a method of interpolation to make the values on the map get created between the 144 and the 232 here. I use a method of interpolation called kriging on here, but the point to be made is that we fill in the map and create values for the whole field. I do want to point out that we got spots in the field that we're getting 700 parts per million of potassium. Actually, this is a few years after we started on our first zone sampling in the worst of the red zones. When we initially started on this field, we were upwards of 800, 850 pounds in the red zone on management zones. Mind you, this was done several years after we had quit applying any fertilizer into those management zones. And by the way, the corn is getting better, but it's taking a long time to get there. So, so it is repeated for all layers. So the concept of what's going to happen is we're going to go out there and we're going to do that grid sample. We're going to get the soil test results for our nitrogen if tested, our phosphate, our potassium. And then we're going to use a yield goal layer to drive it. So we're going to have an equation. Now, generally speaking, what I've been using is either the University Rex or the North Dakota or U of M University Rex, or I've been using the AgVice Rex, which all have yield goals for or yield components to them for these. And basically, it would take your nitrogen soil test, and then we would subtract off any other components that might be nitrogen based if we were doing any organic matter crediting, any starter fertilizer, anything else that we would be doing in there. If you planned on doing any in-season nitrogen programs, we would be subtracting that, and that off of there, we take our yield goal times, in this case, I used 1.1. 1.2 is the university rec for it would be your yield goal times 1.2. But if we were shooting for 200 bushel yield goal times 1.1, that would be 220 pounds minus whatever that soil test was at that pixel, minus any other credits. Again, that thing about in-season or starters or any other things that might be coming off of there, subtracting that off. And then that would give me my nitrogen map. Then we divide that nitrogen map by 0.46 and we'd get our urea fertility map. So case in point, yield goals can be created from your management zones. So again, making the point, if you look at this map, this was our management zones that we built off of zones, and our yield from a bunch of zones in our yield from 2018 all merged together and made these management zones. From that, basically what I did to build management zones or the yield goal map for this is in our software, I just set the bottom end value of this histogram down to 35 for the bottom end, and I set the top end up to 200 bushel. So then it was 200 bushel on the end of that, and now you have a yield map that's 35 to 200 bushel, yield goal map for this field. So what you're going to see here is that 35 to 200 averaging 141.5 bushel corn, and here's my nitrogen, my phosphate, my potassium. When you're seeing the purples up here, when you see purples on any of these maps, even the blues, they're basically saying you don't need any fertilizer out here. When you're starting to see the greens, when you're starting to see the yellows and the reds and stuff like that, hey, we should be getting fertilizer put down out there. So that's kind of the scheme that you'd see. Purples, you shouldn't see product going down. Anything into the greens, you should be seeing fertilizer put down. So on the right-hand side here, though, we use that same equation we did with the yield goal times 1.1, and here's the application map that we came up with from 0 pounds to 322 pounds of nitrogen going down in that area. Your potassium here, or sorry, your phosphorus here from 0 to 214 pounds, and then again the potassium down here going from 0 to 90 pounds. But just making a point here, I'm going to scroll back up a couple for you to get you back to here, and just kind of put in perspective what we had for those differences here. So total of averaging 211, 146, and 11. And then when we, so on the, that was the total pound, or the average pounds on the zones. And when we come down to the grid results down here, just a reminder that on the nitrogen side of it, we were at 211 average. Keep in mind, these were not done in the same season. These are different seasons, so I expect things to move around. Your phosphate was 146 with the grid sample. We're at 122. And on the potassium, we were at 11, and here we are at 16. So just making a point. There's some differences and stuff. So once we get to that point, basically the maps are going to get written out. Keep in mind we would have our seed map and whatnot being created also at this point in time. But at that point, once the maps are created, they're converted into whatever format we need for the controllers. And just making a point, I grabbed just a air seeder pick and a planter pick. Sorry, I got all green on you guys here, but I didn't mean to offend any of you Case guys and New Holland and Cat guys out there, but I just ended up with some green picks. But at the end of that, did take them to the field, and away you go, and then you're back to a seasonal work in front of you. So that's what I got for you guys. I ran a smidge bit longer than I was hoping to. I was hoping to be about 40 minutes, and I ran about 8 minutes long. But any questions from anybody? Anybody got anything they want to throw out or anything like that? Feel free to click on your microphone if you got questions.
See if my audio works here.
Yes.
So this is Rob. My impression, and you can maybe verify whether I'm interpreting this correctly or not, but you talked about, zones versus grids, and then when you're taking your grid approach, it isn't so much that you manage the field a lot differently when you're, writing prescriptions. It's just that you're merging grid data into the zones, essentially. Is that kind of would you consider that to be an accurate description?
It could be an accurate description. The thing, you're on the theory that my management zones are all biomass or vegetative driven, and that's not necessarily true. One of the things I would make a point of is if I get a set of zones that maybe come from, say, a Veris or from a EC data, a lot of times I'm using the same principle of what I'm doing with the zones or grids, or with the grids portion of it, where I'm going to use a yield goal driver in the background. Where I am using vegetative type stuff, the yield goal is already kind of integrated into the zone already, so you just basically have a production level already set. So essentially they're very similar. Yes, they are very similar. But the application or the prescription writing part of it would be potentially notably different for the method by which I would actually write the prescription in the software. I'm gonna just kind of jump out of here for a second, Rob, to just drive home my point for you. Just to show you the difference of what the two look like here. And I'm going to get back to just some training class data here, so I don't go mess up some good stuff. So in the case of writing the zone results components back, Rob, I would be going more into I see that I probably have gotten rid of my yield data there for settings. Oh, that's why I went there. So when I write the zone results back, it's going to be something more along the lines of coming into here and RX mapping and come into here. I would turn on my management zones and come to here, and basically either I could load a set of soil sample results, or I could come in here and say, hey, here's my urea, here's my 1152O, and we'll just say a corn seed in there too. And I would just simply type the rates in here, saying in the blue zone that I'm getting 60 pounds, and so on down the way, and just fill in these tables. Or I could load a spreadsheet that I was already using, coming in like this, and would get the values set out, going that way. So does that make some amount of sense? I'll show you what the grid sample one looks like here too, just to drive home the point here. So we'll just do that and build these maps, and we'll do that. I see how far out I am. Fixed a zone. And so it's going to go against those zones, and it's going to write out all these different layers. It's going to write out all these different layers, and then here's the yield goal. Oops, I didn't say. I did to say. I need to say no test in those. So I didn't test those other zones, so we'll do that and build that map one more time. First time building maps, guys, so give me a break. So what you're going to get out of here, is a set of maps that are going to look something like this, and that my urea map, again on a different field here, but that would be the way that we would get that map. We would get that map derived, coming at it that way. It would be basically, like I say, just that you would be typing the values into this table, or in my case, I already had a preloaded spreadsheet that already had those values in the spreadsheet, Rob. So, but again, you're right. It is yield goal driven. The other way that we would write those maps out is if it was, say, a grid sample, for example, which on this particular field I don't have a quote unquote grid sample, but we'll just say that I had my nitrogen, my phosphorus, my potassium, my sulfur, and say my zinc. And then we would have to have some sort of yield driver, which, whether it was 1 year of yield data, so I mean I could just come down here and say that it was my 2013 corn yield. So that this is actual physical yield data. This isn't a yield goal. This is actual yield map. But then at that point, we would be using a script. We would be using a script, and just to drive home that point, this is what a script looks like. And I don't know if you guys have dabbled into any of this stuff, but you're going to have many different variables down below here. I'm just double checking things. Potassium, sulfur, 2013 corn yield. Need to swap that out for some corn yield, and add as layer, so that. And down below here is going to be the equations of what's going on here. So this section right in here is going to be, so my nitrogen pounds is equal to the yield goal times the pounds per bushel minus my nitrogen soil test. And then I'm going to take that times, I've got a nitrogen multiplier up there for increasing, decreasing, which is irrelevant. And then we'd also be subtracting off any starter credits that I was getting from other things, from other, different crops it's going to go to and stuff down the road. Here's for organic matter crediting built into that script. Here's a phosphorus equation for calculating out the phosphorus, things along those lines. So just making a point. The two methods look very, very, very different. Let's see, I got organic matter. My organic matter up here is soil OM. I did not include this, so I'm going to just put this down to 1 and compile. And what this is going to spit out is it's going to be a 2020 corn prescription file. And just making the point here, this is just going to be a much different way of getting from point A to point B here. So when I get into this, here's my corn prescriptions, and again, just a different way of getting there. So there would be my urea map coming through that way. There's my 1152O map coming through that way. There's the potash, ammonium sulfate, zinc sulfate. And then in this one, it makes a total available nitrogen map also. So anyways, a bit more of an explanation than I think you were looking for, but the methods are very similar mathematically, but the process by which you get there are significantly different.